Imagine this. You're standing on a stage, the applause thundering like a tidal wave. The lights blind you, but the warmth of validation burns through your chest. You've climbed the ladder, conquered the milestones, checked every box. People call you successful. They envy you. They whisper your name with respect, and yet, when you go home, the silence feels heavier than any trophy you've ever lifted. The applause fades into a ringing emptiness. You stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering why you feel more like a fugitive than a victor. What if your ambition, the thing you believed was pulling you toward greatness, wasn't carrying you forward at all? What if it was carrying you away from the questions you're afraid to face, the truths you'd rather bury, the life you've quietly abandoned? Søren Kierkegaard once wrote that the most common form of despair is not being who you are. But what if ambition isn't just a mask? It's the entire costume you've sewn to avoid meeting yourself. Could it be that the endless chase for more isn't proof of your strength, but evidence of a desperate escape? And if so, escape from what? The answer lies in a place most people never dare to look, a place far darker than failure. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because sometimes the road to the top is the perfect hiding place.
Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where words feel warm, eyes shimmer with admiration, and affection wraps itself around your shoulders like a weighted blanket. But beneath all that charm, someone's already counting your emotional currency. They're smiling, nodding, pretending to agree, while silently assessing which parts of you they can mold, drain, or break. Welcome to the psychological jungle, where kindness is often a costume, and manipulation wears perfume. You probably won't survive this if you keep thinking people mean what they say just because they said it sweetly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You meet them in passing, maybe through a friend or at work or online. They don't raise alarms, far from it. They're delightful, engaged, too attentive, but not in a creepy way. They compliment you, listen deeply, laugh at your jokes even when they're not funny. You feel seen, heard, maybe even special. But that's not affection, it's reconnaissance. They're not falling in love with you. They're building a user manual. This is the first mask, sweetness. In Machiavelli's world, charm isn't goodness. It's a weapon, a tactic, a facade you wear to make people lower their guard. The prince doesn't need to be moral. He only needs to look moral long enough to secure loyalty or silence dissent. Nicola would have made an excellent dating coach for sociopaths. But let's talk about your brain for a second, because evolution didn't design you to detect manipulators in dinner jackets. Biologically, your nervous system is wired to detect threat in obvious ways. A raised voice, a clenched fist, a lion charging at your torso. Charm doesn't trigger your defenses. It bypasses them. There's even a mainstream psychological term for this: affect heuristic. It means we tend to make judgments based on how we feel in the moment, not the actual facts. If someone makes us feel good, we assume they are good. Manipulators exploit this shortcut like hackers exploiting old software. Now, here's the kicker. Even when something starts to feel off, when the praise turns to passive aggression or the jokes have that sharp edge, you hesitate. Why? Because you already formed a positive narrative around them. This is called cognitive dissonance. Your brain struggles to hold conflicting beliefs, so it edits reality to preserve the nicer version. And let's not forget your history. If you grew up around inconsistent affection or emotional neglect, the feeling of walking on eggshells might actually feel familiar. That's not love. That's trauma nostalgia. And manipulators, consciously or not, sniff that out. There's a weird, fringe psychological theory known as dark empathy. It suggests that people high in narcissism or Machiavellian traits often do have emotional intelligence, but they use it to simulate connection, not to build it. They notice your vulnerabilities not to soothe them, but to catalog them. Like psychological pickpockets who learn your rhythms before reaching for your wallet. Scholars still argue whether this kind of manipulation is nature or nurture. Some believe it's an adaptive strategy from early childhood, learned in chaotic homes. Others think it's closer to predatory instinct, but whether the manipulator is a broken child or a born tactician doesn't really change the outcome for you. The moment you accept the sweetness without suspicion, the game begins. And they count on you being too polite, too hopeful, too forgiving to question their motives. You ignore the little signs. How they always turn the conversation back to themselves, how their compliments are always slightly comparative, how their empathy seems too rehearsed. It starts with, "You're amazing." Then comes, "I don't know how you put up with other people." Then, "You don't really need anyone else but me." It's not love, it's a tactical positioning. And if you're nodding right now, remembering someone like this, here's your first bitter pill. The person who hurts you later is usually the one who held the door open with a smile. Pain doesn't always walk in with a red flag. Sometimes it walks in with fresh coffee. The truth? Anyone who's too perfect at first isn't. Genuine connection has awkwardness, gaps, human messiness. Manipulation has rhythm. It's curated, timed, even musical. They watch you like a director watching a scene, and they'll keep reshooting until your response is perfect. So what do? You don't stop trusting people. That's not the lesson. You learn to observe the pace. Love doesn't rush. Trust doesn't explode, it accumulates. If someone drowns you in validation too soon, check your footing. If someone mirrors your every opinion like a soulmate echo chamber, check your boundaries. If someone gives you goosebumps but not space, walk slower. And the next time someone seems too sweet too soon, don't ask, "What do they want from me?" Ask, "What do they need me to believe about them right now?" Because that's where the mask lives. So now that the charm offensive has softened your armor, they move to the next phase. Subtle control. Not domination, not screaming, not chains. No, the smart ones never grab the leash. They just hand it to you and make you think it was your idea. This is the economy of manipulation, and its currency is emotional debt. Suddenly, you owe them things you never agreed to. Gratitude for their kindness, guilt for their suffering, loyalty for their approval. You didn't sign any contract, but somehow you feel bound. And you start to pay, in silence, in lowered boundaries, in slowly shifting your decisions to match what you think they'd want. Not because they said so, because they hinted so. This is where things get quiet and foggy. Because unlike violence or abuse, emotional manipulation doesn't slap, it seeps. It's a slow chemical drip that rewires how you prioritize their feelings over your own. Here's how it works. They'll weaponize guilt with surgical precision. Let's say you go out with friends. You come home to a cold shoulder. They don't yell, they don't accuse, they just sigh, a little too loudly. They say nothing's wrong with that flat tone that tells you everything is wrong. That's not passive aggression, that's emotional economics. They've calculated that silence will cost you more than a confrontation. And they're right. You'll cave, apologize, offer affection, cancel next week's plans just in case. And somewhere in their head, they've just made a tidy profit. This kind of manipulation thrives on ambiguity, and it especially thrives on people who were raised to earn love, not receive it freely. If you're a natural peacemaker or someone who fears being seen as selfish, you're their favorite kind of puzzle, because they don't have to force you. They just have to nudge you in the right direction. Now let's add another layer, flattery. It's not just about compliments anymore. It becomes a behavioral reward system. When you comply, they're warm. When you resist, they cool. And your nervous system, starved for the approval you were just getting yesterday, goes into panic mode. This is operant conditioning, and it's the same strategy used to train animals, or toddlers, or unstable governments. Fringe research into cult recruitment found that most successful cult leaders used alternating reinforcement cycles to keep followers hooked. Not just kindness, not just fear, but a cocktail of both, served unpredictably. It creates an addiction to the manipulator's approval, because you never know when it's coming next. It's not the praise that hooks you, it's the absence of it. Scholars still argue whether this emotional conditioning is intentional or subconscious. Some manipulators are master planners. Others just learned early that withholding affection gets them more of it back. Either way, they don't need to understand psychology to exploit it. You might notice that after a while you start editing yourself around them. Not out of fear, but to keep the peace. You phrase things differently. You don't bring up certain topics. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You start second-guessing yourself in conversations. That's the moment they win. Because the real manipulation isn't about what they say, it's about what you stop saying. Now let's talk about emotional bookkeeping. Manipulators are accountants of obligation. If they do one nice thing for you, it's logged. If you question them after that, you're ungrateful. If they open up to you once, you're now their unpaid therapist. If they support you in one crisis, they expect immunity from future criticism. They build an emotional ledger, and you're always in debt. Ever hear this one? After everything I've done for you? Yeah, that line should come with a warning label. But you won't hear it at first. Early on, it sounds like, I just want what's best for you. I'm only saying this because I care. You can tell me anything. But once you do tell them something, anything, they'll cash it in at the worst possible moment. That childhood trauma you shared in trust, now it's part of their argument. That mistake you confessed during a vulnerable night, now it's a trump card in their next guilt trip. You're no longer talking to a partner. You're negotiating with an emotional loan shark. And here's a dark biological tidbit. Our brains are so geared toward reciprocity that we'll repay people even when we didn't ask for what they gave. It's called the norm of reciprocity, and it's so deeply wired that restaurants can increase tips just by giving free mints with the bill. Now imagine what someone can extract from you after giving you unconditional love, which, spoiler, was never unconditional. So, what's the counterplay? Stop keeping the score. Healthy people give freely. Manipulators give to create imbalance. Your job is to detach from the false sense of debt they manufacture. Kindness doesn't require repayment, and love shouldn't feel like an invoice. When you feel that familiar guilt crawl up your spine, pause and ask, did I really do something wrong? Or do they just feel wronged? Do I owe them, or are they trying to make me feel like I do? If the answer's fuzzy, you're probably being played. And the moment you start checking the emotional bill instead of blindly paying it, that's the moment they'll feel the shift. You'll see the mask tighten, the smile flicker, the tone sharpen. Because manipulators don't fear rejection, they fear clarity. You don't realize it at first. It's like waking up in a fog. One day you notice you're hesitating before you speak. You're replaying conversations at night, trying to figure out if you misunderstood something or if maybe, just maybe, you deserve the cold shoulder. You start to question your tone, your memory, even your perception of events. That's not anxiety, that's a battlefield, and the war's being fought in your mind. Welcome to gaslighting, the fine art of distorting someone's sense of reality so thoroughly, they stop trusting themselves. It doesn't start with fire. It starts with tiny sparks of confusion. You say, didn't we agree on this? They reply, you're remembering it wrong. You say, that really hurt me. They say, you're overreacting. You say, that never happened. They smile and say, are you okay? You've been really forgetful lately. And there it is, the seed of self-doubt planted gently, watered with denial. This isn't new. Gaslighting got its name from a 1938 play where a husband systematically manipulates his wife into thinking she's insane, lowering the gaslights and denying it until she questions her own senses. It was theater once. Now it's everyday psychology. The scariest part, your brain will help them. Mainstream neuroscience shows that human memory is naturally reconstructive, not reproductive. That means Every time you remember something, you rewrite it a little. Throw in a manipulator who constantly corrects you, shames you, or tells you others agree with their version. Boom! Your brain starts aligning with the dominant narrative. Even your feelings get revised. You feel hurt? They'll explain why you're actually being too sensitive. You feel angry? They'll accuse you of being aggressive. And then you're apologizing for how you feel, without ever getting the apology for what caused it. Gaslighting doesn't just mess with memory, it messes with your identity. Because the more you're told your perception is flawed, the more you hand over your internal compass to someone else. You let them decide what's real, what's acceptable, what's normal. And the moment you let someone define your reality, you've lost more than the argument. You've lost your anchor. Quirky fact: in studies on long-term gaslighting victims, many described a physical symptom, a kind of internal dissonance, like a buzz in their chest when something didn't add up. But they'd learned to suppress it. One even said it felt like swallowing static. Scholars still argue whether chronic gaslighting constitutes emotional abuse, or if it's a subset of personality disorders like narcissism or sociopathy. But whether it's strategic or instinctive, the impact is the same: eroded confidence, fragmented memory, and eventually paralysis of thought. And this erosion is deliberate. Manipulators don't want to win arguments. They want to own the narrative. If you can't trust your memory, you can't push back. If you question your emotions, you'll never set boundaries. If you're constantly second-guessing, they don't have to silence you. You'll silence yourself. Let's play this out. Let's say you confront them about a broken promise. They won't deny it outright. That's too obvious. Instead, they'll reframe it. I never said I definitely would. I only agreed to try. Why are you always twisting my words? And suddenly the spotlight is back on you. You're on trial for being accusatory, for jumping to conclusions, for remembering wrong. They're no longer defending themselves. You're defending your sanity. Now here's where it gets messier. If you do manage to keep notes, screenshots, receipts, they'll accuse you of being obsessive, controlling, petty. Who even keeps records of stuff like that, they'll say. And you'll feel ashamed for protecting yourself. That's the genius of the gaslight. It burns your house down and makes you apologize for calling the fire department. Eventually you adapt, you shrink. You begin saying things like, maybe I misunderstood, or maybe I am too much, or maybe it's just me. And every time you say that, a part of you gets quieter. Your fire goes dimmer until you barely recognize your own voice. So what do? First, get your reality anchored outside of them. That means talking to friends, journaling, recording your thoughts in real time. Anything that creates a paper trail of your truth. When you feel confused, refer back. You're not crazy. You're being trained to doubt your own sanity. Don't cooperate. Second, trust the static. That gut tension, that sudden clench in your stomach when their words don't match their tone, that's your nervous system waving a red flag. You've just been taught to ignore it. And third, start asking this question: who benefits if I doubt myself right now? Because when you stop fighting to prove your reality and start protecting it, they lose leverage. Remember, manipulators don't fear confrontation. They fear certainty. They fear someone who won't backtrack. Someone who says, I know what I heard, and sticks to it. Someone who doesn't need a consensus to feel valid. When your voice returns, it won't be loud. At first, it'll tremble. But that trembling voice, that's the sound of your mind repairing itself. And eventually they'll notice it. They'll say, you've changed, that you're cold, that you're difficult, that you used to be so easy to talk to. Smile. That means the gaslight's out. Now that the gaslight's out and you're blinking in the dim return of your own sanity, something strange happens. They switch tactics. The fire dies down. The blame softens. They drop their voice and tilt their head, and just like that, they turn into someone else entirely. They become pitiful. Not cruel, not angry, not righteous. Just sad. And suddenly you feel awful. You feel like a monster for defending yourself. You wonder if maybe they're the broken one. Maybe you misunderstood their outbursts. Maybe their anger is just pain. Maybe their manipulation was a cry for help. And maybe if you're just a bit more patient, a bit more nurturing, they'll change. This is the pity hook, and it's sharper than anything they've used before. Here's how it works. Once control starts slipping, manipulators often reach for victimhood as their final mask. If you've spotted the lies, questioned the double standards, or stood your ground, they retreat into a story. A heartbreak, a trauma, a tragedy, it might even be true. But that's not the point. The point is, you're meant to feel guilty for ever confronting them at all. You say, "Why did you lie to me?" They say, "You have no idea how hard my childhood was." You say, "You're manipulating me." They say, "I guess I really am a monster. Everyone leaves me." You see what they did there? It's not an apology, it's a diversion. They've rerouted the spotlight so subtly, you don't notice your own shift, from righteous anger to caretaking empathy. Mainstream psychological research into narcissistic abuse shows that empathy-based personalities are especially vulnerable to this stage. If you grew up needing to fix others to feel safe or valuable, the pity hook doesn't feel like manipulation, it feels like a mission. You're not just staying with a toxic person, you're saving them. Let's make it worse. Many manipulators are trauma survivors. They've been abandoned, shamed, or mistreated. So when they collapse into tears and say, "Everyone leaves me," they're not lying. They're just strategically selecting which pain to show you and when. This doesn't mean you shouldn't care. It means you should understand what your care costs you. Because pity is a glue. It keeps you stuck. You can't leave someone who's bleeding. You can't draw boundaries with someone who looks like a kicked dog. You can't protect yourself when they've just made themselves smaller than you. That's the paradox. You think you're being compassionate, but what you're really doing is abandoning yourself. Quirky psychological tidbit. In high-control groups like cults and certain therapy circles, leaders often disclose personal trauma strategically to build loyalty. This creates a trauma bond, a kind of emotional superglue that fuses guilt with affection. It's powerful, and manipulative people use it like currency. Scholars still argue whether this behavior qualifies as intentional deception or if it's a defense mechanism developed unconsciously over time. But whether it's cold calculation or trauma reflex, the result is the same. You stop seeing them as dangerous and start seeing them as damaged. Now here's where it turns wicked. When they sense that pity is working, they double down. Their pain becomes the center of every disagreement. You raise a boundary, they fall apart. You express a need, they remind you of everything they're going through. You bring up their betrayal, they say, "I'm already broken, what more do you want from me?" And you feel like the villain for asking for bare minimum decency. But here's the brutal truth. Empathy is only empathy when it flows both ways. If you're expected to hold space for their pain, but they offer none for yours, that's not intimacy. That's emotional servitude. Let's make this practical. Here's a test. If someone only becomes vulnerable after being called out, if their confession always ends with you comforting them, if their trauma is used to justify current harm, you're not in a relationship. You're in a hostage negotiation with your own conscience. And no, helping them won't heal them, because healing requires accountability, and manipulators use vulnerability as camouflage, not commitment. So what do you do when the pity hook catches you? First, name it, out loud if you can. I see you're hurting, and I can care about your pain without excusing how you treated me. That sentence is a scalpel. It separates their wound from their weapon. Second, pause your reaction. Don't rush to soothe. Don't apologize for your boundary. Sit in the discomfort of their sadness without rescuing them. Let the silence breathe. Their pain doesn't belong to you. And third, ask yourself this. If I hadn't confronted them, would they have opened up at all? Because real vulnerability isn't reactive. It's honest, it's earned, and it's never used as a shield against responsibility. They'll tell you they're broken. They'll tell you they don't know how to love properly. They'll tell you that their behavior comes from pain. And maybe all of that is true, but you're not a rehabilitation center. You're not a counselor with a rescue mission. You're a human being who deserves love without having to earn it through sacrifice. Because if the only way to fix someone is to keep losing pieces of yourself, then the price isn't healing, it's you. At this point, you're tired. You've been love-bombed, guilt-tripped, gaslit, and tugged by the tear-streaked sob stories of someone who never quite seems to change. But still, part of you holds on, maybe because they've convinced you no one else will ever love you like they do. Maybe because you've invested so much time, it feels wasteful to walk away. But deep down, you're starting to notice something that won't let you sleep. They seem to be admired by everyone but you. Your friends say they're charming. Your family says you're lucky. Strangers smile when they walk into a room. They hold doors, tell jokes, play the model partner in public, and you start wondering, is it just me? That, dear listener, is the power of reputation management. And no one does it better than a manipulator who's read Machiavelli. You see, Niccolò wasn't interested in virtue. He was interested in power. And power, he said, doesn't come from being good. It comes from looking good. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them." Manipulators live by this gospel. They curate an image so pristine that anyone who questions them looks unstable. This is not by accident. This is strategic social insulation. Here's how it works. While they're chipping away at your sense of worth behind closed doors, they're busy building a public persona so radiant that your reality becomes unbelievable. If you try to speak up, people will tilt their heads and say, "But they seem so nice." And just like that, your story sounds like a smear campaign. There's even a mainstream term for this: image crafting. Narcissistic and Machiavellian personalities are often obsessed with how they're perceived. They know your credibility drops the moment they shine brighter than you, so they invest in performance, selective kindness, strategic generosity, and occasional vulnerability shown only in group settings. Think back. Have they ever done a grand gesture only when others were watching? Have they ever suddenly become more affectionate when your friends or family were around? Have they ever offered to help you, but framed it in a way that made them the hero in the eyes of others? That's not love, that's optics. A fringe psychological tidbit from con artist research reveals that many successful manipulators maintain a clean outer identity, high-functioning jobs, active social lives, even community involvement, while operating with shocking cruelty in private. One researcher called it the angel-demon split, public halo, private claws. Scholars still argue whether this duality is a conscious split or a fragmented sense of self. Some say it's an evolved strategy from childhood, masking pain to avoid punishment. Others argue it's outright sociopathy, dressed in good tailoring. Either way, the mask becomes harder to tear down the longer it's worn. Now here's the cruel twist. Because everyone sees them as wonderful, you start to doubt yourself even more. It's gaslighting by proxy. The social proof makes you wonder if you're the problem. You start editing your complaints. You downplay the hurt, you isolate, and in doing so, you protect their image for them. Congratulations, you've become part of their PR team. So, how do you break this illusion? You stop playing the game. You stop explaining the abuse to people who are still clapping for their performance. You stop expecting justice from a crowd that never saw the crime. And you start documenting your reality for yourself. Write it down. Every time they twist your words, diminish your feelings, humiliate you behind closed doors. Collect the quiet bruises, the emotional welts, the tiny betrayals, because when the mask slips, and it will, you'll need your truth intact. And then slowly you begin to withdraw validation, not with drama, not with threats, with disinterest. Don't gush over their grand gestures. Don't amplify their social moments. Don't be their smiling sidekick in public performances. Just stop feeding the image. Because here's the secret they fear most. Their power doesn't come from charm. It comes from the applause, the illusion, the borrowed light reflected off of others. When you go dim, their spotlight falters. And when you start showing quiet consistency instead of conflict, when you're no longer playing emotional whack-a-mole, no longer reacting to the push and pull, people start noticing things. The cracks. The tone. The way their eyes change when you stop performing too. And eventually someone will pull you aside and say, "Hey, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself around them." And that question? That's the first thread unraveling their carefully woven mask. And just when you think you've figured them out, when the mask has slipped and the charm has dulled, they surprise you. Out of nowhere, they're kind again. Thoughtful, present. They make your favorite dinner. They say just the right things. They hold your hand in the way you forgot you liked. They look at you with that tenderness they showed back when it all began, and you think, maybe I overreacted. Maybe they can change. Spoiler, they haven't changed. They've just pulled out the soft trap. This isn't manipulation by force. This is manipulation by memory. They're not threatening you. They're giving you a taste of the version of them you missed, and just enough of it to keep you hoping it'll come back permanently. But it won't. Because what they're using now is the variable reward system, a technique most commonly studied in slot machines, or lab rats. See, psychologists discovered long ago that the most addictive reward isn't the one that's consistent. It's the one that's unpredictable. When a reward shows up only sometimes, and at random intervals, your brain becomes obsessed. You wait longer, you try harder, you hope more, because the reward could come at any moment. And you've seen it happen. The moment you pull away, they become affectionate again. You bring up breaking up, they cry and beg. You disappear. They flood your phone with apologies, long messages, even therapy promises. But it's not consistency, it's intermittent reinforcement. A psychological loop that doesn't give you peace, only cravings. This is the same strategy casinos use to keep people glued to the machine, even after losing hundreds. It's not the win that matters. It's the possibility of the win. Manipulators become your personal slot machine. You keep pulling that emotional lever, thinking this time they'll be who they were at the start. But the house always wins. And you're not even getting coins, just crumbs of affection. Here's where it gets even more sinister. Because those sweet moments, they're not random. They're responsive. They show up when you threaten the system, when you set boundaries, when you get distant, when you finally start to detach. They don't love you. They love the power they lose when you stop trying. Fringe Psychology Corner, studies in abusive dynamics show that many survivors describe their worst pain not as the abuse itself, but the moments of tenderness that followed it. That's what kept them hooked. One researcher called it affection trauma, where love becomes so entangled with harm that you can't separate the two anymore. And scholars still debate whether this cycle is malicious or automatic. Is it a predator's tactic or a wounded child's survival pattern? Either way, it doesn't matter, because it works. You get high on the good days, you cling to them, you talk about them in therapy, but they can be so sweet. I know they love me deep down. They just get overwhelmed. And in doing so, you become your own gaslighter. But deep down, you feel it, that twist in your stomach, the tension in your chest. You're not at peace, you're in a cycle. So how do you escape a trap that feels like comfort? First, name the pattern. Say it aloud. They're only kind after I pull away. This love is inconsistent, and that inconsistency is by design. Naming it breaks the illusion. It shines fluorescent light on the velvet cage. Second, track the ratio. For every one good day, how many bad ones? For every sweet message, how many passive-aggressive digs? For every apology, how many repeat offenses? Write it down. Don't guess. Don't justify. Let the numbers tell the truth. Third, disconnect hope from history. They were kind once. Okay, so what? That version of them is dead, or was a performance to begin with. Either way, it's gone. And hope built on memory is still hope, but it isn't truth. Now here's something uncomfortable. You might miss the highs, the emotional roller coaster, the passion, the dramatic makeups, especially if you've never experienced stable love. Manipulators make chaos feel like intimacy. They blur excitement with affection. But here's the rule. If love only feels good when it's being earned, it's not love. It's training. They're not nurturing your heart. They're programming your nervous system. And when you pull back, when you don't take the bait, when you stare into their changed eyes and say, "I've seen this before," the mask will crack again. Kindness will curdle, the softness will dry out, and the trap will try one last snap. But this time, you're watching it, not walking into it. And that's your first real act of freedom. Now, the trap isn't working. You're pulling away. You're not reacting like you used to. You're starting to say no to their games, their guilt, their sudden tenderness. And that's when they escalate, but not with a fight, not with fury, with isolation. They begin to quietly cut the strings that connect you to anyone who might remind you of your worth. First, it's little things. Your best friend doesn't really get us. Your mom's always been weird about our relationship. That coworker you hang out with seems flirty. They don't demand. They suggest. Just enough to make you feel awkward, to second-guess the people you trust. And just like that, you start shrinking your circle. Not because they told you to, but because it seems safer. This is informational control, and it's more dangerous than any fight you've ever had. See, most manipulators don't want to own you. They want to control the narrative. And the best way to do that is to make sure there are no mirrors left in your life. No one who says, "Hey, that's not normal." No one who reminds you who you used to be before you started explaining every decision. This technique isn't unique to romantic relationships. Cult leaders, con artists, even political tyrants have all used social isolation as a foundational tactic. Why? Because when you're surrounded only by people who reinforce their version of reality, you lose the ability to question it. A mainstream psychological concept called pluralistic ignorance describes how people in group settings can misinterpret everyone else's silence as agreement, even when they're all thinking the same thing. Manipulators rely on this. They want you to feel like you're the only one with doubts, so they separate you from dissent. And it's not always physical. It's emotional isolation that really does the damage. You might still see your friends and family, but you no longer tell them the full story because they wouldn't understand, or because you're tired of explaining, or, most dangerously, because you don't want them to judge your partner. So you edit your reality before anyone else even gets the chance. That's the mind trap. You start protecting the person who's isolating you. Quirky sociological tidbit. In hostage situations, there's a known phenomenon where victims begin defending their captors even when they've had chances to escape. It's called Stockholm Syndrome, and it doesn't just happen in bank vaults. It happens in romantic relationships, cults, and even political regimes. It's called Stockholm Syndrome, and it doesn't just happen in bank vaults. It happens in romantic relationships, cults, and even political regimes. Scholars still debate whether emotional isolation is always intentional or simply a byproduct of insecurity. But regardless of motive, the outcome is the same. You stop trusting your instincts because you've stopped hearing other voices. Let's talk about those voices for a second. Remember the friend you used to tell everything? The one who raised their eyebrow when you first described your partner's moods? Where are they now? Still there? Or have they become a ghost? And your family, do they tiptoe now? Are they afraid to speak up? Do they pretend everything's fine because you keep insisting it is? That silence is part of the strategy. Because without contrast, there's no clarity. If everyone around you only reflects the manipulator's framing, you stop seeing yourself. So how do you fight a war against isolation? You reconnect, quietly, relentlessly, not for their sake, for yours. Reach out to the friend you ghosted. Say, I think I pulled away and I miss you. Text your sibling, not with a big confession, but with a small memory. Tell your therapist, or get one. Even if it's awkward, even if you stumble, rebuild the mirrors, because clarity requires reflection. You need to hear your voice echoed back by someone who remembers it. And if you've already burned bridges under their influence, rebuild bridges, apologize. That's it. Don't justify, don't explain. Just say, I see what I did, I'm trying to come back. The people who love you will open the door. And when the manipulator notices the shift, when they see you texting more, smiling more, rebuilding more, they'll panic. Maybe not outwardly, maybe not at first, but the control was in the disconnect. And now you're stitching the world back together. They'll call it betrayal. They'll say you're being influenced. They'll say, you never used to be like this. And you'll nod. Not because they're right, but because they're accidentally telling the truth. You're not like you used to be. You're awake now. The silence doesn't work anymore. You're reconnected. You've got mirrors now. Voices echoing your own doubts, reinforcing your instincts. The fog is thinning and they can feel it. So they reach for something new. They stop pretending. And what emerges is not rage. It's strategy. They start making moves behind the scenes, dropping subtle lies about you to mutual friends, seeding doubt in places you can't see. Suddenly, people treat you a little differently. Conversations shift. You're not quite sure why. This is the lie behind the smile. Because when charm fails, when guilt loses its sting, and when pity doesn't hold you, manipulators do what Machiavelli advised centuries ago. They begin to attack you while appearing honorable. They never smear you openly, they insinuate. Oh, she's been going through a lot lately. I don't want to say anything, but I'm worried about him. I hope they're getting help. It sounds like concern. It's poison wrapped in silk. Machiavelli wrote, men should either be caressed or crushed. But the clever ones do both. They smile while crushing you, because an overt enemy is easy to spot. A concerned friend? That's harder to defend against. And the people around you don't know what's happening. They're confused. They hear two stories, and the manipulator's version is smoother, more polished, more believable. You, on the other hand, might sound defensive, emotional, inconsistent. And that's because you're still reacting from pain. They're already building the narrative. Mainstream research into relational aggression shows that adults, especially those with high manipulative tendencies, often favor reputation damage over direct confrontation. It's safer, cleaner, more deniable. This tactic isn't just interpersonal. Political operatives use it. Corporate saboteurs, cult leaders. It's a timeless game. Control the story, and you control the outcome. Let's break down the anatomy of the lie. Step 1. Credibility crafting. They've already built a persona people admire. That's the bait. Step 2. Empathy leverage. They disclose selective vulnerability to appear honest, so that any later attack sounds like concern, not manipulation. Step 3. Plausible distortion. They never say you're abusive. They say, you can be a bit intense sometimes. They never say, you're unstable. They say, you just have such big feelings. And the result? You become harder to believe. Fringe psychological tidbit. There's a concept known as the Darvo dynamic: deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's when manipulators turn the tables so thoroughly that you become the accused. You bring up something they did, and by the end of the conversation, you're apologizing for hurting them. Scholars still argue whether Darvo is a conscious pattern or an unconscious defense. But what's certain is this: it works best when the manipulator has already softened your credibility in the eyes of others. Here's the most maddening part. Their lies will have just enough truth in them to seem believable. Maybe you did snap once. Maybe you have withdrawn. Maybe you are emotional lately. But what they won't mention is why. They'll present the consequence as the cause, and people will nod along. So how do you protect yourself from the lie behind the smile? First, stop playing defense. You don't need to argue against every rumor. That's what they want. Your frantic denials only make you look unstable. Second, document everything. Don't rely on memory. Keep the texts, the voicemails, the receipts. If things go nuclear, and they might, you'll want a record of what's real. Third, build truth with consistency. You don't need to convince people overnight. You just need to be unshakably yourself, calm, clear, grounded. In the long game, reality always wins. And here's something few people will tell you. It's okay to lose some people along the way. Some will believe the lie, some will enjoy the drama, some will stay neutral, which, in manipulative dynamics, is still complicity. Let them go. You're not here to manage the entire perception economy. You're here to heal. And when the manipulator sees that their smile no longer disarms you and their lies no longer define you, they'll shift again. Because if they can't control your image, they'll try to control your emotions. And that's where we go next. They couldn't isolate you, couldn't reel you back in with sweetness, couldn't keep the pity spell working, and now even their charm campaigns are unraveling. So what's left? Emotional surveillance. Not with cameras, not with microphones. With eyes, with silence, with questions that don't sound like questions and observations that feel like traps. They're watching you. Not because they're curious, but because control now depends on prediction. And manipulators know, if they can't control your environment, they can still try to control your reactions. You start to feel it, that tension when they're in the room. You notice how they stare too long when you laugh at someone else's joke. How they ask, "Rough day?" right when your mood lifts. How they start predicting your behavior before you've even noticed the pattern yourself. It's not intuition, it's data collection. Because manipulators study you like a lab rat in a glass box. They memorize your triggers, your tells, your vulnerabilities, not to understand you, to use you. Mainstream psychology calls this emotional tracking, a behavior commonly seen in high-control relationships. It involves meticulous observation of emotional cues to anticipate mood shifts, moments of weakness, or opportunities to insert influence. To put it simply, you're no longer a partner, you're a system to hack. And they've been watching your code. Remember that private thing you said offhand about feeling insecure in crowds? Now, every time you're out with others, they bring it up. You seem anxious. Remember that moment you hesitated before replying to a text? You've been distant lately. Remember that one thing that made you cry once? I could bring that up again if I wanted. You start to live on edge, hyper-aware. Because now, even your recovery is being monitored. That smile you're practicing, they notice. That better sleep you're finally getting, noted. That call you made to an old friend, flagged. They clock it all. And they don't stop you, not yet. They just react to it in ways that unnerve you. A strange silence after you come back from lunch. A flat stare when you mention a colleague's name. A vague, "I'm just not feeling connected lately," after you've had a good day. Nothing concrete, just enough to keep you guessing whether you did something wrong. This is surveillance as sabotage. They don't need to yell anymore. They just need you to anticipate their disappointment. And you will, because you've been trained to. There's a quirky term in behavioral studies known as anticipatory obedience. It's when animals, or people, start adjusting behavior before being corrected, simply to avoid punishment. It was first studied in dogs, trained with unpredictable electric shocks. Eventually, the dog didn't need the shock. It cowered preemptively. You are not a dog. But if you've ever said, "I didn't do anything wrong, but I feel guilty," you've been trained just the same. Scholars still argue whether this kind of emotional surveillance is conscious or instinctual. Some say it's the tool of the narcissist, the need to dominate every emotional landscape. Others say it's survival behavior, born from the fear of abandonment. But the truth is, motivation doesn't change the result. You're exhausted, you're shrinking again, and this time, not from overt control, but from the weight of always being watched. So what do? You stop performing. That doesn't mean you yell or confront. It means you become unreadable, not cold, not hostile, just opaque. Start responding with, I'll think about it. I'm not sure yet. Stop narrating your healing. Stop explaining your growth. Let your joy exist without a press release. Because manipulators need access to your feelings in order to mold them. And every time you explain, justify, or overshare, you give them fresh intel. There's a quirky term in behavioral studies known as anticipatory obedience. It's when animals, or people, start adjusting behavior before being corrected, simply to avoid punishment. It was first studied in dogs trained with unpredictable electric shocks. Eventually, the dog didn't need the shock. It cowered preemptively. You are not a dog. But if you've ever said, I didn't do anything wrong, but I feel guilty, you've been trained just the same. Scholars still argue whether this kind of emotional surveillance is conscious or instinctual. Some say it's the tool of the narcissist, the need to dominate every emotional landscape. Others say it's survival behavior, born from the fear of abandonment. But the truth is, motivation doesn't change the result. You're exhausted, you're shrinking again, and this time, not from overt control, but from the weight of always being watched. So what do? You stop performing. That doesn't mean you yell or confront. It means you become unreadable. Not cold, not hostile, just opaque. Start responding with, I'll think about it. I'm not sure yet. Stop narrating your healing. Stop explaining your growth. Let your joy exist without a press release. Because manipulators need access to your feelings in order to mold them. And every time you explain, justify, or overshare, you give them fresh intel. You've gone quiet now. Not in defeat, in clarity. You're no longer explaining, no longer reacting on cue, no longer playing the emotional puppet show they've carefully choreographed. And for the first time in this entire tangled, aching process, they begin to panic. So they reach for their most primal weapon. Shame. Not the loud kind, not public humiliation. No, this is the slow drip. The carefully placed sigh. The side comment. The raised eyebrow. The stories they tell in a tone just soft enough to sound harmless, just sharp enough to cut. Because when they can't control you through affection or fear, they'll try to bury you under the weight of who they say you are. And that's the trick. Shame doesn't need to be true to be effective. It just needs to feel familiar. If you've ever been told as a child that your needs were too much, if you were ever scolded for crying or laughed at for dreaming too big, if someone ever taught you, directly or indirectly, that love is conditional on performance, then shame doesn't feel foreign, it feels like home. Manipulators know this. They smell it. And they use it. You want space? Wow, you're so selfish now. You try to set boundaries? You're cold. You never used to be like this. You say no after everything I've done for you? They won't attack your actions. They'll attack your character. Because once they convince you that you're broken, cruel, or unlovable, you'll spend the next 6 months trying to prove them wrong. Not by arguing, by overcompensating. You'll soften your tone, not because you're wrong, but to seem less harsh. You'll apologize not because you're guilty, but to restore the peace. You'll take care of their feelings, again, because deep down, you're trying to prove you're still good. And just like that, the power's back in their hands. This is the hidden cost of shame. It turns healing into a performance. You start proving your growth instead of living it. Mainstream psychology defines toxic shame as the belief that one is fundamentally flawed and therefore unworthy of love, respect, or acceptance. It's deeper than guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And manipulators feed that belief like it's their last source of energy. There's a fringe idea floating around some trauma therapy circles that calls this identity corrosion. The slow erosion of selfhood through chronic micro-abuses, not big betrayals, but small degradations over time. 1,000 paper cuts. A constant whisper that you're too much, too needy, too intense, too emotional, too cold, too something. Scholars still argue whether shame is a tool or a symptom, whether manipulators wield it consciously or leak it from their own unresolved pain. But again, motive doesn't change damage. Because here's what happens when shame takes root. You start censoring your joy. You dim your ambition. You disconnect from your body. You shrink from your own mirror. And you go back to the person who made you feel that way, hoping they'll absolve you of it. It never works. So how do you fight shame? Not with pride, that's just a mask. Not with defiance, that drains you. You fight shame with self-trust. That means you stop asking, am I the problem? And start asking, who benefits if I believe I am? That means you stop explaining yourself to people who already decided you're guilty. That means you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I might not be perfect, but I'm not who they say I am. And when that little voice creeps in, maybe they're right about me, you respond gently without drama. Maybe they are, but even if they are, I still deserve peace. Because you don't have to be flawless to be worthy of respect. You don't have to be perfect to deserve space. You don't have to earn your right to boundaries. Here's something radical. You're allowed to disappoint people who expected you to keep playing small. Let them talk. Let them label. Let them believe what they need to believe to make sense of your refusal to carry their emotional baggage anymore. Because when shame stops working, when their voice no longer overrides your own, you'll notice something strange. The manipulator won't get angrier. They'll get scared. Because for the first time, you're not just walking away. You're walking away without apology. And that's when the battle shifts. At this point, they know. They know they've lost control of the storyline. They know the shame no longer sticks. They know you found your footing, and their old tricks now fall with a thud. So they try something desperate. They apologize. Or at least they pretend to. Welcome to the theater of the faux apology, where remorse is a performance, not a process, and every I'm sorry is just another attempt to reset the game. It might sound like progress, it might even sound sincere, and maybe part of it is. But listen closely, the script always slips. They don't say, I hurt you and I take full responsibility. They say, I'm sorry if you felt hurt. They don't say, that was wrong and I want to change. They say, I hate that you see me that way. They don't say, tell me how I can make this right. They say, let's just move on. That's not an apology. That's a deflection with a bow on top. Mainstream psychologists call this non-apology language, and it's designed to soothe tension without accepting accountability. It often includes passive voice, mistakes were made, conditional phrasing, if I hurt you, or emotional baiting, I guess I'm just the villain now. The purpose isn't healing, it's control. They want the tension gone, not the behavior corrected. They want forgiveness as a tool, not as a transformation. And you're tempted, because, let's be honest, you want to forgive. You're tired, you're emotionally sore, you don't want to keep fighting, and their remorse feels like a warm hand after a cold war. But here's the test. Watch what happens after the apology. Do they start to listen more, or just talk softer? Do they make changes without needing praise, or do they expect applause for the bare minimum? Do they honor your boundaries, or just find sneakier ways to break them? A true apology includes change. A faux apology includes pressure to pretend it never happened. And here's where it turns insidious. If you don't immediately accept the apology, they twist the script again. You said you wanted me to take responsibility, and now I have, but you're still mad. What do you want from me? I'm trying here, and you just keep punishing me. I guess nothing I do will ever be enough for you. It's no longer about what they did. It's about how you handle their apology. Classic Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And suddenly you're on trial again for not healing on their timeline. Quirky fact from conflict resolution studies. People tend to rate apologies as more sincere when the speaker appears to suffer. Which is why manipulators will often cry, collapse, or even make dramatic statements like, "I don't deserve you," or "maybe you'd be better off without me." They're not admitting harm, they're hijacking your empathy. Scholars still argue whether manipulative apologies come from actual guilt or just fear of consequences. But the motive doesn't matter as much as the aftermath. So, how do you tell the difference? You ask two questions. One, what specifically are they apologizing for? If they can't name it clearly and without spin, they're not sorry, they're stalling. Two, are they willing to repair the damage, not just erase the discomfort? That means listening, changing behavior, respecting boundaries, and making amends without being asked. If the answer to either is no, then their apology is a tactic, not a turning point. Now here's the dangerous part. That's okay. But know this, apologies are not contracts. Accepting one doesn't bind you to stay. You can say, "Thank you for saying that," and still leave. You can say, "I believe you mean it," and still protect yourself. You can even say, "I forgive you," and never speak to them again. Because forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is about freeing your spirit. Reconciliation is about protecting your safety. And those two don't always walk together. So if you're standing in the silence after their latest "I'm sorry," if your heart is battling your instincts, if you want to believe them but your stomach is still tight, trust your body. Trust the pause. Trust the stillness that comes when manipulation no longer finds purchase. Because when their apology doesn't change them, but starts changing you again, how you talk, how you move, how you sleep, that's not healing. That's the next phase of the game. And this time, you're not playing anymore. So you don't accept the apology. Or maybe you do, but with eyes wide open. Either way, you've shifted out of the old rhythm. The dance is offbeat now. You're not feeding them reactions. You're not validating their narrative. You're not obeying the rules of their emotional theater anymore. And they feel it. That's when the gloves come off. You start to fight back. Not with fists, not with fury, but with boundaries, with silence, with indifference, with statements that are clean and final. I'm not discussing this again. That's not my responsibility. You're allowed to feel that way, but I won't be participating. You've stopped explaining. You've stopped pleading. And that sends a wave of panic through them like nothing else. Because when you fight back on your terms, you're not just rejecting their behavior, you're rejecting their entire worldview. And so they retaliate. It comes in 3 waves. First, the smear campaign. They can't control you anymore, so now they have to control how others see you. Suddenly, you're being described as difficult, cold, selfish. You abandoned them. You changed. You're not the person they fell in love with. They'll twist truths into weapons. They'll tell mutual friends edited versions of fights. They'll cry on the shoulders of people who only ever saw their social mask. And if you respond, if you defend yourself too hard, well, now you're the dramatic one. Mainstream social psychology calls this impression management. And in narcissistic dynamics, it's a preemptive strike. They know you might tell your side, so they tell theirs first, louder, cleaner, and with a victim halo so polished, it reflects back pity. And here's the worst part. Some people will believe them. That's not your failure. That's the cost of walking away clean. Second, the relapse phase. Just when you've gone no contact or emotionally gray or simply detached, they'll show up again. Not to apologize this time, to love bomb. You'll get a long message, a nostalgic photo, a cryptic thinking about you. Maybe even an emergency, a car accident, a death in the family, a breakdown. Something that requires your compassion. Something that forces you to choose between self-protection and humanity. This isn't reconciliation. This is emotional warfare. Because they've realized they can't win through logic or dominance, so now they reach for your empathy. Again. Fringe psychological insight. In trauma-bonded relationships, separation anxiety can trigger extreme emotional outbursts. Not just in the survivor, but in the manipulator. One study even found that certain narcissistic personalities experience a literal stress response when their supply walks away. Their brain registers detachment as a threat. So they panic. They might cry, beg, say they've changed, that they've seen the light, that therapy is happening, that this time they'll listen. But it's not about growth. It's about reaccess. Let them in and the cycle starts over. Which brings us to wave 3. Third, the nuclear option. When all else fails, when lies don't spread, when pity doesn't work, when kindness doesn't disarm you, they might try to destroy you. This looks different for everyone. Reporting you at work, accusing you of things you didn't do, showing up at your house, using shared kids, finances, or friends as pawns. This is post-breakup warfare, and it's not rare. Especially in high-conflict personalities, rejection can trigger rage so intense, it looks like obsession. You didn't just leave them. You dismantled the reality where they were in control. Scholars still argue whether this final stage is an act of desperation or ego preservation. But in either case, it's not love, it's retaliation. And that's the moment where your response defines everything. Because the goal now is to provoke you, to bait you into reacting, screaming, posting, sending that long essay of truth, showing up at their door, trying to make people see the real them. Don't. Your best revenge? A life they cannot access. No contact. No emotional leakage. No need to be believed, just the discipline to be free. And when you do respond, because sometimes you have to, make it clean, simple, documented, legal if necessary, emotionless like a weather report. Here's my boundary, here are the consequences. I wish you healing, then disappear. Because the moment you stop being predictable, you become untouchable. And the manipulator, once the puppeteer of your mind, is now just a figure on the stage, performing for no one. They tried everything: charm, guilt, pity, silence, smears, apologies, even rage. But you didn't fold. You didn't scream, you didn't run back. You didn't explain yourself to people who already chose the performance over the truth. Now it's just you. No longer their puppet, no longer their mirror, no longer their emotional ATM. But here's the part they don't tell you in the recovery stories. The hard part, the strange part. Freedom feels lonely. Because even if they were toxic, they were predictable. And predictable pain is a hell of a thing to walk away from. It gets into your bones, it structures your day, it becomes the lens through which you measure everything: your worth, your success, your goodness. And when that disappears, you feel weightless, not in a peaceful way, in a vertigo way. You might find yourself tempted to reach back, not for them, but for something to react to, something that feels like identity. But now is the time for the exit strategy. And no, it's not a dramatic monologue. It's not about closure or confrontation. It's about logistics, boundaries, distance, discipline. Because leaving a manipulative relationship, whether romantic, familial, professional, or platonic, is not one moment. It's a series of quiet, difficult decisions. Here's how you do it. Step 1. Sever access. Block. Mute. Restrict. Unfollow. Remove shared calendar invites. Get off group chats. Every thread that connects you is a potential re-entry point. They'll notice. They might call you childish. They might send a long, emotionally loaded message about how real adults talk things through. Ignore it. Real adults also walk away when a fire keeps burning them. Step 2. Secure your ecosystem. Tell your closest people what happened, not for gossip, but for safety. Let them know what kind of contact attempts to expect. Ask for support, not validation. You don't need a chorus, just a net. And don't be surprised if some people fade away. That's not betrayal. That's pruning. Let the leaves fall. The branches will strengthen. Step 3. Audit your triggers. Certain songs, certain places, certain times of day. Manipulators carve themselves into your nervous system like graffiti. You're going to need to rewire. This doesn't mean avoiding everything. It means being aware. When a memory punches you in the chest out of nowhere, breathe. You're not being pulled back. You're being reminded why you left. Step 4. Create a new routine. Even if it's just brushing your teeth with a different song on, take a new route to work. Cook something they never liked. Claim your life back in tiny rebellions. Every unfamiliar step is a declaration. I am no longer orbiting someone else's gravity. There's a quirky psychological truth here. Research shows that even positive change causes stress because the body craves the known. So if you feel shaky or sad or numb in this new silence, that's not weakness, that's detox. Scholars still debate how long it takes to unlearn trauma patterns. Some say 21 days, others say years. But most agree on this. Consistency breaks conditioning. That means no relapses, no checking their socials, no responding to just one text, no scanning crowds hoping to be seen. You're not avoiding them. You're starving the part of you that still needs their approval. Because closure isn't something they give you. Closure is when you stop giving them access to your peace. Now here's the brutal honesty of it all. You may never get justice. They may never apologize. The people they lied to may never know the truth. But freedom? Freedom means that doesn't control you anymore. And in that silence, eventually, you'll hear something else. Yourself. Your unfiltered laugh. Your uncensored thoughts. Your real desires. Your voice uncoded in apology or fear. And in that moment, you'll realize you're free. Until one day, you'll wake up and realize you're not waiting for anything anymore. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The connection has been cut, the patterns dissolved, the patterns dissolved. Not grief, not anger, but this. You begin to see just how much of your life was spent trying to keep them happy. And it hits you. You need new armor, not walls, not paranoia, boundaries. And not just any boundaries, Machiavellian boundaries. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because the world you live in isn't always safe. You can't walk through it as a child forever. Heart on your sleeve, mouth unguarded, soul open to every whisper. You've tasted manipulation. You've danced with cruelty dressed as love. Now it's time to become unreadable. Because manipulators don't just feed on weakness, they feed on predictability, on transparency, on your need to be liked, understood, forgiven. So you learn the ancient art of strategic coldness. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop broadcasting every thought. You stop explaining yourself to people who twist your words. You stop handing out maps to your softest places. Mainstream psychology supports this approach. It's called low-disclosure boundary work, deliberately sharing less personal information until someone proves they're safe. It's not paranoia, it's vetting. And it's powerful. You start to say, I don't want to talk about that. That's personal. I'm still figuring that out. No, No excuse, no nervous laughter, no softened edges to make the no easier for them. Just no. Quirky tidbit. Spies are trained to speak plainly and reveal little, even in casual conversation. Why? Because emotion, over-explaining, and nervous chatter are the first tells manipulators look for. You don't need to be a spy, but you do need to become boring to the wrong people. Scholars still debate whether emotional opacity is healthy long-term. Some say it leads to isolation. Others argue it's a critical phase in trauma recovery. But most agree that after prolonged exposure to manipulation, you must reset your internal compass, and that means filtering who gets access to you. So how do you start? You build what Machiavelli would call a fortress of the mind. Not made of stone, but of calm. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer feel obligated to respond to emotional bait. You no longer confuse guilt with responsibility. You stop reacting. You start observing. In conversation, you notice who listens and who waits for their turn to talk. You test people gently, say no, and see what they do with it. Set a boundary and watch their reaction. Disagree once and note if they punish you with silence or sarcasm. And when someone crosses a line, you don't beg them to understand. You just exit. No door slam, no fireworks, no explanation. Just a locked gate, quiet, unshakable. And here's where the deeper work begins. You stop needing to be nice. You start being clear. You stop needing to be liked. You start being safe for yourself. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't handle your fullness unless it served them. So now you walk differently, slower, straighter, eyes up. You don't scan the room for who needs something from you. You scan for alignment, for softness that doesn't come with strings, for attention that doesn't feel like study. And when you find it, you'll know, because it won't feel like a test. It will feel like peace, not a rush, not a high. Just the quiet recognition of someone who isn't trying to get inside you to rearrange the furniture. Someone who knocks and waits. And if they never come, that's okay too, because now, finally, you're home. And here you are, not broken, not ruined, reforged. The version of you who entered that manipulative relationship, whether it was with a partner, a parent, a boss, or a friend, was kind, hopeful, open. You thought goodness would protect you. That if you loved hard enough, stayed soft enough, forgave deeply enough, they would rise to meet you. But now you know, some people feed on softness. They mimic your values, mirror your dreams, sink into your life, not to build something, but to extract something. Approval, status, control, warmth. A distraction from their own emptiness. And you became the perfect host, but not anymore. Because now you see the full price of being nice without discernment, of confusing love with loyalty, of enduring pain because someone might still change. And you carry that awareness like a blade, hidden but sharp. That doesn't make you jaded, it makes you awake. You've learned what Niccolo Machiavelli hinted at centuries ago. The world is not fair, and human nature is not always noble. But survival isn't about becoming cruel. It's about becoming strategic. You learn to measure a person's actions, not their apologies. To note the pattern, not the promise. To trust slowly and retreat swiftly. This doesn't mean you live in fear. It means you walk with filters instead of walls. Because now you know, manipulative people don't always look like villains. They look like rescuers, lovers, mentors, helpers. And the sole cost of trusting blindly is often your voice, your vision, your vitality. Scholars still debate what manipulation really is. Is it malice or survival? Intentional or instinctual? But you don't need a consensus. You've lived the evidence. You've walked through their labyrinth of half-truths and emotional traps. You've felt the sting of being blamed for your own pain. You've grieved the loss of who you were before they taught you to doubt that person. And now you mourn that loss. Yes, mourn. Because healing isn't just escape. It's grieving the self who tolerated too much, the one who didn't know better, the one who kept hoping, the one who believed kindness could cure cruelty. That self, she was beautiful. He was brave. They were doing their best with the tools they had, but they were not built for war, and now you are. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not with vengeance, but with boundaries. Not with fear, but with a quiet knowing that you will never again betray yourself for belonging. That you will never again explain your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. That you will never again offer tenderness to someone who only touches to assess your softness. From this day forward, your love is sacred. Your time is earned. Your peace is non-negotiable. And your heart, still beating, still open. But now protected, not by wall, by wisdom. Let's wind down now. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Let the quiet settle in your chest, like snowfall on a long-abandoned battlefield. You did it. You outgrew the game. You broke the cycle. You became the one thing manipulators cannot touch. A person who sees them and walks anyway. So now the night holds you gently. No more masks, no more mirrors that lie, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after a long, hard truth has been spoken, after a storm has raged, and something inside you has finally gone still, not numb, but centered. Breathe in, you're safe now. No one is watching you with hidden motives. No one is twisting your words or studying your tone. You are no longer being performed for or performing. You are simply here, and that is enough. You may feel hollow or heavy or strangely light. Healing has no script, no clean arc, but you're walking it anyway. One breath, one boundary, one sacred no at a time. You have stepped into a season where you are no longer available for manipulation. No longer a mirror for someone else's self-loathing. No longer a soft landing for people who refuse to grow. From now on, you will protect your peace like Machiavelli protected power, with precision, with strategy, with a quiet ruthlessness that says, I know who I am now, and I will not be unmade. Let that truth wrap around you like a weighted blanket. Let the tension bleed out of your jaw, your chest, your fists. You are not their puppet. You are not their echo. You are your own. Sleep well, soldier of clarity. Tomorrow is yours.